the Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting for this morning, November 4th, 2020. We have some work session items today. This will not be a day where we have public comment, but we'll concentrate on a particular subject, and that is the McKenzie Fire recovery process. So I will start with agenda item 15, because this is a carryover from our meeting yesterday. And that is if there are any adjustments to our agenda. No adjustments. Okay. Any emergency business for this morning? No. Okay. We'll go straight into item 17, county administration, on our first work session in the matter of assisting the development of the Blue River sanitary system. With us is Austin Ramirez, our community and economic development director, and Dan Hurley, our public works director. And we've been working on this for over a year. And for the most part, this will be a good summary of where we're at on this subject with the rest of the board. And at this point, I see Austin. So Austin, do you want to kick us off? We'll need your audio.
Thank you. Is it showing the PowerPoint on the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks. Trying to navigate three screens at this point is a little bit problematic. Okay.
You're young. You can do it.
Perfect.
If you have guests that you want to introduce, feel free.
Yes, please. Thank you. And I appreciate the time this morning, Chair Buck and Commissioners. We will be providing an overview of efforts to assist the development of a sanitary system in Blue River, as well as discussing next steps required to do so. There are several. This is a complex and complicated endeavor that will require multiple partners, multiple agencies to join us, and they have today. I'm very appreciative of all of them. Joining us, we have Tim Lowy and Marilyn Cross with the McKenzie Community Development Corporation, Sarah Means with Regional Solutions, Patrick Wingard with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, Mary Camerata from the Department of Environmental Quality, Janine Parisi from eWeb, and several county staff, including Dan Hurley, Amber Bell, Lindsay Eichner, Alex Kyler, and Andy Clark. So it's an all hands on deck effort for something like this. And so I appreciate everyone's time today. We'll go ahead and jump into the presentation so we can do our best to stay on schedule with everything we need to cover. So I would like to note that this is not a new effort. In 2015 and 2016, Lane County Community and Economic Development brought on 2 Hatfield Fellows to assist with rural economic development projects. This included developing a roadmap for increased development and a sanitary system in Blue River, which was attached in the materials. In the time since and accelerated over the past year, the collaborative of staff here has met regularly to discuss next steps. Unfortunately, in the middle of this effort, the tragic holiday farm fire struck and caused catastrophic damage to Blue River and the McKenzie Valley. And while that trauma is still recent and fresh and the community is just starting recovery, the very resilient Blue River community members in the CDC here recognize that there is an opportunity to rebuild for a more sustainable and a better future. So I've asked Tim Lowy to speak to the community's resilience and desires to move forward. Tim, could you go ahead and speak to that, please?
Yeah, can everybody hear me? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is that a yes?
Tim, this is Pete Sorensen. I'm on the phone, but I just wanted you to know I'm participating in the meeting.
Okay.
And we can hear you. Yeah.
All right, good. Can everybody see me? As if that's a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Some people are
Go
on
ahead.
iPads, so they can only see a limited amount of people, but those are on PCs can probably.
Not a worry. Not a worry. Okay, so well, first of all, as you probably all know, the flip side of the Chinese character for crisis is opportunity. And that, I guess, is what we're talking about here. The McKenzie Valley, particularly about a 15-mile section of it, was devastated by the holiday farm fire. I happened to lose my home, as did about 400 or 500 other people. The epicenter of that fire was Blue River, which was completely destroyed. It looks a lot like Dresden for those of you that are familiar with the pictures from World War II. As a result of that, we've had a series of discussions up there with the CDC, working the whole length of the valley from Cedar Flat up through Clear Lake to address the issues. But in the rebuilding process, we decided we'd focus initially in Blue River because, again, of the nature of the disaster, and two, because we can then work from Blue River out to the other communities and the other homes along the way, Nimrod, Vida, Rainbow, etc. So as Austin mentioned and Heather mentioned, this process has been going on for at least 2 years with the CDC. And prior to that, it was going on with the Hatfield Fellows. And prior to that, it was going on with eWeb, who did a site study analysis for a rather more conventional sanitary system for the community. The most recent turnabout came when we had this discussion with Heather and others about the best way to proceed, at which point the advisory group or task force that included state, local, and community representatives commenced, and we've been working on and on for that for every 3 or 4 months for the last 18 months, I guess I would say. A strategy emerged. The first point in establishing what is known as a STEP system or an Orenco system, which is a modular system that allows people to be added to and increased as the need develops. So for example, for those of you that are familiar with Blue River, if you went from Highway 126 to the east end, down to just past the bridge that goes over Blue River, you would be dealing with what used to be the old Highway 126. And that is in fact the core of Blue River proper. It is also the area where there are the most issues with drain fields, individual drain fields. Little bit of background. At one point in the early 1900s, Blue River was the largest community in Lane County. That was because there was gold in them there hills at the Lucky Boyd mine. So it was something of a boom town at the time. It thrived through timber and then dam construction and other aspects up until probably the early 1990s when the restrictions on harvest of timber from the federal government came in, and also the harvest for a lot of the private landowners up there was in a transition state. To this time, what evolved over time was in fact only the ability to provide employment largely in seasonal recreation and tourism without benefits and near minimum wage in many cases. So the economy in the whole valley has suffered a lot for that. As far as the sanitary system is going, the first step after establishing where you want it to go is 2 parts. One, a place for essentially for initially the size of a probably 30-foot connex, which can be above ground, which is the processing plant. And then the identifying a community drain field. And this is kind of where we got stuck. Lane County granted us $5,000, as did eWeb, to proceed on next steps. And those steps included trying to identify a drain field for the leach lines for the community. When all is said and done, there were 3 sites that were identified: the Blue River Park, which is the most centrally located site, and then Seneca Jones parcel that's just to the east of the community track, and then the school site, because the school board and its superintendent are strongly in favor of a sanitary system for Blue River, so it can expand and grow and bring other types of opportunities that they can't do right now with single lot septic systems. Finally, the septic systems in Blue River are failing. This has been known for quite a few years, but many of them have been failing for some time, which was part of the impetus for this, because as much as I know everybody loves Blue River, I think they're more concerned about the McKinsey as the source of the metro area's water. So we happen to be in the right place for this. So the real question became, one, how imminent is groundwater contamination that could flow into the Blue River itself, and then flow into the McKinsey about 500 yards down the road. That's still being determined. There was some indication of that, although I will say that eWeb monitors the water very closely in Blue River and other areas of the McKinsey, and they haven't seen any indication of nitrates, which is what you would expect to see. But they've known that you've got a failing septic systems up there. On those 3 sites that we identified, it turned out that all 3 of them would require a plan amendment to the Lane County's comprehensive plan.
Tim,
Go ahead.
sorry to cut you off. We've got a pretty lengthy section on the land use and the site analysis. If you would mind waiting to jump into those details until we get there, that'd be great.
Thank you, Austin.
Thank you.
Do you want me to stop here, or do you want me to go ahead with the site analysis?
Let's dig into the site analysis when we get to that point. That'd be great.
All right. Will you then move to the next slide for me, please?
Yep. Thanks, Tim. So I do want to cover, Tim has mentioned some of this. There are 3 main steps in question here. Extending the Blue River community boundary to accommodate the site for a sanitary facility, which Amber will be discussing shortly. The formation of a special district or authority, which we will discuss in greater detail later, and then as well as identifying and obtaining funding. So Tim, here's the point where we can dig into site analysis and the properties you've found so far.
All right, well, that's just where I was. The property that we have identified as a priority to move forward is the park, which requires a plan amendment, as do the other 2. The next step would be 2 aspects of it that could occur simultaneously or in tandem. One would be, when we can get to it, to evaluate the open areas of the park itself, which you see looks like it has a large track around it. To the north of that, in that wooded area, is where the playground equipment, et cetera, is. Unfortunately, the 160 trees in there have been destroyed, and almost all of them will have to be removed. Or that's to the south, I'm sorry. And then to the north, there's a little 4-acre parcel there that could also serve for a step system to accommodate 100 hookups. We've estimated it will take 1.5 to 2 acres. You would also then need another 1.5 to 2 acres as a replacement in the case the first one starts to fail. So that's a 4-acre site. All 3 of the sites we mentioned are there. This site, if it were inside the community boundary, seems to be the best one. So the next steps would be, 1, to look at forming a sanitary district or a joint authority, or a sanitary district including water, and at the same time evaluating the open areas of the site with some test holes to see how effective it would be and what treatments would need to be used to move it forward. That's the site analysis. If we can go on to the next slide, please.
Thanks, Tim. Amber, can you talk a little bit about the land use process that we're looking at here?
Yes, I am happy to. Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. Amber Bell. So the land use process, well, let me just say first that this map here shows the current unincorporated community boundary for Blue River, as well as the current zoning. So just to give you a sense of what exactly we're talking about. And Austin, if you wouldn't mind to go to the next slide. So the land use process will largely depend on the goals for the community and what specifically is pursued. So if the goal is to place a community sewer system outside of the existing community, unincorporated community boundary, that's not permitted by Oregon administrative rules. There's a prohibition on placing a community sewer system outside of an urban growth boundary or unincorporated community. So that would require some type of plan amendment process to modify the community boundary and bring that parcel in if that's the one that is desired to place a community system on. And so what that would likely look like is doing a rural comprehensive plan amendment to expand the boundary. And then also there would likely need to be a rural comprehensive plan amendment and zone change to change the plan designation and zoning to allow a community sewer system. And then possibly, depending on what's proposed, a goal exception would be allowed or required as well. If the sewer system is proposed inside of the unincorporated community boundary, then there would still need to be some type of change to the plan designation and to the zoning to allow for the utility for the community sewer system. And then another potential option would be to look at the planning for Blue River more on a larger scale and investigate the feasibility of a new comprehensive planning effort. And that could potentially re-envision the community boundary and also look into some new policies that would encourage resilient redevelopment of the community. LMD planning does not currently have the resources to embark on this much larger effort. But we understand that there may be some funding opportunities at the state level, and we're working with the state to identify potential funding opportunities and resources that, if secured, would allow us to look into the feasibility of this larger planning effort.
Question on this land use specifically. I've been asked if we could simply annex the park into the boundaries, and if that would be another option.
So I think that when the term annex typically means to bring into a city boundary, the current designation is rural unincorporated community. And so I believe an option, I don't know what the feasibility of annexing Blue River would be, or that would require to create an incorporated city and then bring in that property to some sort of incorporated city status. I'm not sure what exactly the steps or feasibility of that would be. But if it were to be brought into the current unincorporated community boundary, that would require a plan amendment to bring that in, expand the boundary. I will say that there are specific criteria for how to designate an unincorporated community, and that's determined by the Oregon Administrative Rules 660 Division 22. There's specific requirements for how to designate the boundary, and there are also policies in our rural comprehensive plan. They're pretty complex criteria. We would have to determine exactly what the requirements would be. So I don't know that we can say exactly what the feasibility of expanding the boundary is at this point, but that's certainly one option.
Commissioner Boswich.
Thank you. So there's an existing special water district there, right? Special district for water, I should say. Does that boundary include the park, or does it follow the UC?
I am not sure. Austin, do you happen to know the answer to that question?
I'm not sure either. I'm not sure if it follows the UC or not. I can check with county council or others and follow up.
How difficult is it under Oregon law to change the special district from a water district to a water and sewer district?
I'm not sure how difficult it is. We do have a slide just on establishing a district and the options that Blue River prefer that might help answer some of these questions.
Okay, I appreciate that because it seems like we've added property to districts fairly easily over the years, whether it be utility districts or fire districts out in the rural area. It's not an annexation, it's a boundary change for a district, which seems to be a fairly simple thing to do and is usually at the request of the property owner. So that's why I was asking. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Do you need me to move to the next slide, Amber?
Yes, please. So the other thing that's been discussed is whether the community should maintain the rural unincorporated community status or pursue an urban unincorporated community status. There's some benefits with the urban unincorporated community status, such as that would allow a larger buildings to be developed in commercial and industrial zone lands. And the previous Hatfield study that Austin mentioned earlier identifies that as one potential option or path to encourage development in the area. If that were pursued, there are certain requirements for urban unincorporated community status as well. So that would involve, again, a plan amendment process. It would specifically require the forming of a public facility plan, adoption of a public facility plan, and the criteria for designating a community with the urban status. It requires 150 dwellings be in existence and that there be a community sewer in place. So if that can't be achieved, then there may be the need for a goal exception or some sort of amendment to that rule if that were feasible. So that concludes summary of the land use processes we see. I'm happy to answer any questions that there might be.
Thanks, Amber.
Commissioner Farr.
Just a simple question to throw out there. We're talking about an urban UCR. What are the possibilities of incorporating as a city? Is there any? And I'll look at Tim who lives there. I mean, it's maybe a big step, but for the future, is that a possibility or a consideration?
I think Tim has frozen on us.
Uh-oh.
Then Austin, I'll pass it along to you. It's probably an unanswerable question at this point. It's probably just a floating question for the time being.
We've discussed it as a group as one of the options, but given the challenges with incorporation, it seemed like not a path of least resistance. I don't know how to put it. It was a very complex path with several variables. Amber or Patrick, I know we talked about this at the last meeting, feels like years ago with how 2020 is going. Can you weigh in a little bit there?
And I will say no need to dwell on that particular question right now with so many other things to talk about, Amber, but just leave it out there as a floater because I'm back to Tim's quote that the school district is interested in the waste facility, waste processing plant, quote, so that Blue River can grow and expand and bring in other opportunities which cannot happen, ... So, end of my questioning, and please carry forward.
Thanks. Patrick and Amber, let's dig into that one in the questions portion for discussion.
We got one question from Commissioner Bozovich, and I know Patrick, you wanted to say something too.
Let Patrick go ahead and respond to Commissioner Farr real quick.
Very good. Go ahead, Patrick.
Patrick Wingard, not Commissioner Patrick. Okay. I'm just making sure. You guys can hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes,
Okay,
Commissioner.
Amber did a great job of laying out the options for you all. I would offer you to not get so hung up on the rural community versus the urban unincorporated designation difference right now. I want to help you all. Amber referenced the state. We're turning over some rocks in the Transportation Growth Management Program. We maybe can collaborate with some money from maybe Business Oregon. We're trying really hard, guys, to bring together a planning effort that is appropriate but nimble, that offers, in my opinion, the strongest case to develop the Blue River community boundary commensurate with the sanitary sewer capacity. I mean, I want that boundary to be snapped right to the capacity. That's your strongest play. And so I'm civil engineering by background. I almost you look at this from a engineering perspective is, you know, the community development aspect is, of course, super important, and going through the visioning and understanding, you know, what the needs are, and respecting, you know, indigenous people and everybody that has interest in this area. That's super important. From the Division 22 perspective, from the land use arena perspective, just as important is building a defensible foundation for this plan amendment. And I think it has everything to do with getting the infrastructure right sized along with the community. If that's 80 equivalent dwelling units, it's 80. If it's 150, it's 150. If frankly, Blue River needs 300 or 400 dwelling units in order to legitimately afford a sewer plant, then I think we need to look at a 300 to 400 dwelling unit rural community, or whatever it might take. But right now, where I'm at is I really want to know what the carrying capacity of that land is, and what the right size and type of sanitary facility fits best in Blue River. And I'll end with this. I do think that park property sets up to be the best property. Admittedly, I'm uninformed. I haven't done all the analytics I would normally do to make that statement, but trusting in Tim Lowy and all the important work that's been done by eWeb and you all over the years. Your comp plan even mentions incorporation as the most aggressive path forward here. So if there is a place in Lane County to endeavor the conversation on incorporation, it would be in Blue River. Of course, the middle ground, and I think Austin and I are kind of like more like, well, let's see if we can make this plan amendment fit, because, you know, as Amber pointed out, the urban unincorporated classification could afford the community more economic development opportunities. But I don't know, maybe the rural community is maybe the better flavor for Blue River. And I think that's yet to play out. But you know, let's not let that 150 dwelling unit number drive any of the decisions here. You know, let's let the engineering and the environmental and the land use facts and conditions, you know, and the politics, of course, drive the decision making here, instead of trying to get hung up on, you know, are we a rural community or should we do an urban unincorporated community? I'd really like to see the engineering and what the carrying capacity of the land is, and the sanitary facility sizing and that kind of conversation to get out in front a little bit, if you will, to help inform the visioning piece, or the, you know, how do we make Blue River a more resilient, you know, a fantastic rural service center for the entire county and region.
Chair Buck, thank you, Patrick, for that response.
Thank you. We'll go to Commissioner Bozovich and then Commissioner Bernie.
Patrick, I'm a civil engineer by trade also, so. And the question I was going to ask was to Amber somewhat, and you sort of touched on it in some ways, is what are the findings that we have to adopt in order to expand a UCB? You know, I know when we do UGBs, we have to go through an entire buildable lands inventory and demonstrate that we don't have enough land to make our 20-year projections, either for residential or employment lands, one or the other, and then we're allowed to expand to that 20-year limit of projection. What kind of findings do we have to make on a UCB? Is it a similar process, or, you know, I haven't been through this, and it's interesting. We really only have a couple communities that really are like this in Lane County. Mapleton mirrors Blue River kind of in a lot of ways with a water and sewer. It actually has sewer service, a community sewer service. So just kind of so I can understand a little bit what the difficulties are in the option of expanding a UCD. What kind of findings do we have to adopt?
So thanks for the question. That's a good question. And Patrick, feel free to jump in here as well. So by and large, that criteria comes out of the Oregon Administrative Rule for Unincorporated Communities, and it requires a mix of a pattern of existing land development that includes commercial, industrial, public uses, your sort of developed and committed lands, and/or dwelling units and associated residential lots at a greater density than exception lands outside of rural communities. I'm just summarizing here. And land that's contiguous to Goal 3 or 4 exception lands can be included in a community boundary if the land was occupied on the date of division by one or more of certain uses, including a park, but there's other criteria as well.
So that sounds like the park actually is an exception land and meets some of those criteria, particularly adjacency. So that at least leads me to believe that this, at least we're setting up for a process that could work.
There may be an option there. Like I say, there's other criteria there as well. That's a really quick summation of what's required, and we would probably need to go through and identify each of the criteria, but there may be a path there.
Yeah, well, at least it's not resource land.
And I would just add, if Blue River retains its rural community designation, that's probably a lower bar. That's probably an easier path forward from a findings perspective than if Lane County were to propose changing the classification. I'm almost hoping that you just stay with the rural community. Amber, let's look into this question, but I don't think rural communities, I mean, if you have 151 permanent dwelling units, you can still be a rural community. You don't have to be an urban unincorporated community if you pass that threshold. Now, granted, you do have some lesser opportunities inside the commercial and industrial land use arena, but it's like 3,000 square foot versus 10,000 square foot. I think those are the building sizes. So I think the community gets to answer for itself, what are the right size and types of land use non-housing land use activities would be appropriate. To me, it feels like the rural community designation would work. The plan amendment to bring in the sewer property seems like it's really wired for success, given that it's already referenced in the comprehensive plan. I think you can do the alternatives analyses in good fashion to elevate this site as being the appropriate location to amend the boundary. The last point I would make is there are a couple of clusters of rural residential homes that are also just outside the Blue River boundary. I would hope that those areas could be looked at, whether it's from we need to get sewer to those homes because the lots are too small and they're on the river and it's just a problem, or maybe they belong in the community because they're proximate and having them connected to sewer is just a better environmental situation, and they can help pay for the sewer system too. So I would hope at this point, for Lane County's sake, that you would be able to stay in the rural community arena, grow as large as appropriate, that the future sewer could accommodate from a residential perspective. And Austin doesn't want to hear this. Maybe not try to go so hard on the economic development stuff where you feel like you need to kind of have real large industrial buildings or real large commercial buildings. You can just have lots of little ones. But that's my take.
I love Patrick's energy. I love having you in these discussions. It's always optimistic and great to hear. Commissioner Bernie, you had a question as well.
Heather, I'd like to jump in at some point, so please call on me at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Well, first, I want to state, Patrick, forgive my kidding and calling you commissioner when you wanted to make sure we did not do that. I've now heard you twice, and I'm very impressed. I really am, with the perspective that you bring to the table and the flexibility and the desire to have it be community centric in terms of what the state not telling the community what their needs are, but trying to facilitate a fix. And I also want you to know I am not a civil engineer by training. My dad was a mechanical engineer, and that's all I needed to know. I did not want to get into engineering. But in introducing any new product to market in my past, I found two generic kinds of approaches. One is putting sales ahead of engineering, which inevitably creates problems. And the other is putting engineering ahead of sales, which is what I hear you suggesting. I personally also want to say, even the process of rebuilding is economic development. I mean, economic development really relates to any movement of capital and economic activity, and it really doesn't relate to size of structures or whether there's lots of small ones. And this body is trying to apply to more and more areas, but we have to, one, the whole notion of economic development, meaning reinvesting as many dollars, whether it relates to contractors or the purchase of supplies or what have you, into local businesses, so that money is recycled through the community more and more. And that, in fact, does define a lot of economic development. Having said that, it sounds to me, not an expert in this arena, that every question this board has asked thus far relates to how do we best and quickest and least bureaucratically move forward so that the community of Blue River can be as resilient as possible and people can get home and back to work as quickly as possible. And I would hope that as you partner with our staff on that you consider this an opportunity to put some additional resources, look at some pilot aspects that are going to be applicable statewide in rebuilding, and help us achieve this as quickly and as community-centrically as possible. And I look forward to the next phase of this being what that type of proposal would look like. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for this discussion and presentation. I had a question about the connection with the rebuilding of Blue River and the context of other public services that are needed for a community of that size. And correct me if I'm wrong, but are you talking about maybe 400 homes being rebuilt in the vicinity? Is that a fair number, or is it bigger or smaller, or do you know?
Audio, if you're speaking there.
Commissioner Sorensen, we do know how many structures were damaged. What we don't know yet is how many will be rebuilt. That is a long process. And
how many were destroyed?
Residential, I'm trying to remember the exact number.
That was 431 or 435.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Well, we have two cities in Lane County. One is Wesper with about 265 people, and one is Dune City with about 1,400 people. And with 435 structures, obviously, if all of them were rebuilt and all of them had at least one person in them, then or even two people in each structure, average, you would still have a population that would be between the population of Wesper and Dune City. And my question really is, with the need for fire service, police service, and sewer service, at least three of the major public services not to mention things like library service or other things that are public services, you're getting to the point where having a municipality that can assist with providing these services without, let's say, knocking on the door of Lane County government, why wouldn't the residents move ahead with, if they wanted to, with a city designation, and then they could be in charge of their own, destiny? What's the drawback to forming a city?
Tim, are you still with us? Do you want to jump in here a little bit?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll go with Pete Sorensen's question first, Commissioner. Those 400 dwellings are over about 30 miles of the highway. So incorporating those 400 dwellings would be difficult in terms of infrastructure and prohibitive probably in terms of cost. I want to go back to Commissioner Boycevich's question. The park is in both the boundary for the water district and the park district. It is not in the community boundary, but it is in part of both of those special districts. So that's a Q&A. I do have some responses to the question about economic development and urban rural versus rural, or some answers to those, but I don't know if now is the appropriate time. So I'll let the chair determine that.
It looks like we have one more slide left. Austin, is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
We'll have more time to discuss. Why don't we let you finish your last slide and then we can delve into some questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We have discussed already forming a special district or authority. There are three models. One is creating a new sanitary district, which would result in two separate entities, this sanitary district and the before mentioned water district. Water services into a new sanitary district, resulting in one entity. Or three, create a joint water and sanitation authority, which would dissolve the water district and result in one entity. Blue River has expressed interest in this third option, a joint authority. And so there are three options to establish this. As you can see, they've received a memo from Northwest Local Government Legal Advisors discussing this. County Council has reviewed it, and initial review shows that there is concurrence with those findings, but further exploration would be required, especially given the revised statutes that would be involved. Last thing I wanted to mention, there's a lot of questions around financial considerations and how much this will cost. There are a lot of unknown variables. There are a few things we do know. One, Lane Management has added the proposed plan amendment to their long-range work plan. So that will charge the estimated $23,000 in review fees to department funds rather than the applicants. The applicant will likely need the assistance of land use consultants and attorneys for something this complex. The total cost of these services is unknown and a bit difficult to predict given any appeals or litigation that could increase costs. And then Lane County and eWeb, as Tim mentioned earlier, have each provided the McKenzie CDC with $5,000 grants to fund initial site testing and feasibility. And then the most significant costs ultimately will be associated with planning, engineering, construction, and operation. So these are unknown, and further discussion and analysis would be required to determine that. And then I know there's been quite a few questions, and I know there's some folks in the chat who have some answers and things to add to some of those. Amber, do you want to, I know there was a question about the park property being a resource zone. Can you clarify that a little bit?
Thanks, Austin. Yeah, I believe Commissioner Bozovich, you made a comment earlier or asked the question about whether the park property has a resource designation. I believe it's zone PR, which is technically a resource designation, but the OAR that I referenced regarding the adjustment of the unincorporated community boundary discusses including resource lands that are adjacent to the boundary if they meet certain criteria. The challenge might be is to include a sewer system on that property because the criteria talk about just bringing in that portion of the land that's been used for use like a park use.
And did I hear that Tim had an additional question? Want to give him a moment?
Yes, I do. Well, it's not a question, it's a comment on quite a bit of the discussion. So stop me when you've heard enough from me. In the terms of the cost, we are currently working with the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, who has been funded by USDA RDI to rebuild the water district infrastructure in Blue River. That will help in the terms of their representative will help us identify costs and essentially act as an owner's representative dealing with vendors, contractors, and suppliers, et cetera, to get that accomplished. And so that opportunity is there. The county is also working with eWeb and the University of Oregon on what's known as a grant opportunity task team, grant resource opportunity task team. And they're working together to try and keep their eyes on the grants that may be available, because you can imagine many opportunities arise after a natural disaster like this. So they're keeping our eye out for Blue River as well. In the terms of the designation, whether it's a rural community designation or an urban designation, and this also goes to Commissioner Bernie's question, as I mentioned earlier, the employment base up there is seasonal, close to minimum wage without benefits, and that's tourism. When I first came to Lane County, you could be in the McKinsey and raise your hand and get an employment if you perform that would support a family with one parent at home. That's no longer the case. There have been inquiries that I can't go into too much detail on because I've asked to be confident or keep them confidential at this point, about establishing a different opportunities for employment in the Blue River area. One of them is related to research, and another one is related to manufacturing, small manufacturing. Either of them could both, if they come to fruition, and we're in very early stages of discussion, either of them could require more than 3,000 square feet of building space to move forward. So both of those, in terms of economic development, the other thing that for the Blue River area and the valley as a whole is the installation of very high-speed internet. If we've learned nothing else from COVID-19, we've learned that people can effectively work remotely, as you are right now. Professionals then could work remotely in the area and require the ancillary services that go along with that. That would bring a economic benefit without affecting the environment significantly. So that's another element of opportunity. Finally, there's the whole question of the visioning. We have been working, the CDC has been working with a public-private nonprofit partnership that includes the landscape architects, design architects, urban planners, civil engineers, structural engineers, contractors, and subcontractors, prime subcontracts, and kind of as a resource to where we bring issues to them and they research them with task teams to the various areas of discipline, and then come back with high-level responses. This is volunteer on their part and was brought to my attention by Oregon AIA, Kurt Wilson, and John Stapleton, who's a principal at Privet Architecture. One of the elements, there's two elements of that we are pursuing right now related specifically to Blue River. One is a visioning process, quick visioning process involving the community in terms of ways to look forward. It kind of works on top of a visioning exercise that was done as a studio exercise in the School of Landscape Architecture 12 to 15 years ago. The other one is an landscape architectural studio for the redesign and redevelopment of the Blue River Park, because what is now a forested area will not be a forested area very quickly, because those are danger trees, and they just, most of them are not viable for the future. So we're trying to get, well, the landscape architect folks are trying to get, Lori Mooney are trying to get a studio for the park vision and design in either winter term or spring term of 2021. Both of those will involve the community, and I'll give an opportunity for the community to weigh in about their vision. So that's kind of where I am. I think we've covered it there. It's true that if with the park were brought in, it could be incorporated as a joint authority. I was unfamiliar that the sanitary district could pick up a water district. I guess our preference is one governing body for those two districts as opposed to two separate governing bodies, even though it's the same board members for both. Thank you for the time. I hope that answers some of your questions anyway.
Thank you so much. I have Commissioner Vozovich and then Commissioner Farr. Thank you.
Thank you. So that last slide, kind of answered some of my questions about districts. It does seem to forming a joint water and sewer, the third option sounded one of the best to me, provided it can be done. I had a quick question though, and this is my civil engineer coming at me a little bit. The fire in that area was hot enough to melt rubber gaskets off of water mains. That can change soil significantly, a fire that hot. Is there any concern that there's still the capacity for the sewer system in that area, that the fire may have actually changed the carrying capacity of the soil to take on a septic system like that in the park?
So I can give you a quick response to that. The area in the park that are being considered, which is the open area and then the 5-acre parcel to the north, had no infrastructure through them, so they wouldn't have had to deal with gaskets going through. It's also entirely possible that the biologics on the soils were sterilized by the heat of this fire, so that's a concern as well. The water district's an entirely different discussion, but yes, gaskets melted, but the other element to it is that the water district itself was just, the distribution system was CA pipe, cementatious asbestos pipe, which has a useful life of about 50 years, which we are about 10 years past from its initial construction. The issue with that pipe is that the calcium leaches out of the cement over time and it becomes extremely brittle and easy to break. So we're looking to try and replace the distribution system as well as repair the valve connections.
Yeah. And
If I can.
yeah, Mary, you want to address the soil issue?
Yeah, I wanted to say that is actually a concern, Commissioner, that the soil is dead because it got too hot. And then in that case, what has to happen is people have to dig up the soil and bring fresh soil in so that it can reestablish itself and then put in a system. So that'll have to be evaluated before something goes in. And I think we have time for that. I also think that on planning purposes wise, we have the short term, which is getting people back up to Blue River, which will be on-site systems. And then thinking of the longer term of having a wastewater treatment system put in there, again, because it's just getting the funding and putting that all together. So I think about it as a two-step process. I wish we could do one or the other, but I think it's just, we have fire, we have people that need to rebuild, we have cash flow issues. So think of it as more of a two-step process. And then we're going to have to evaluate whoever puts a septic system in there to see if that soil's okay and can handle treatment.
Yeah. And, I'm fully aware that, community sewer system, you got to design and install a collection system. And of course, the community park's uphill from a lot of stuff. So you got to have a pump station somewhere. So that's a lot of design and infrastructure installation that's going to have to happen. So I do understand the two-step version of this. And Tim, I do appreciate the ACCP issue with the asbestos cement. I replaced a lot of that pipe when I was at EWEB in North Eugene and out in the Bethel area, where it had been installed by previous water districts that got annexed. into the eWeb system when they went belly up over time as the city slowly annexed pieces of those systems. And that ACP was probably not as old as some of Blue River's that we replaced. It brings a leak if you look at it wrong.
Right. Exactly.
I'll just add a little bit to this conversation. This particular issue about the viability of the septics that are existing came up in the form of FEMA mitigation reimbursement, because that replacing the individual septics is going to be really expensive and really challenging, not only lot size, but because of the soil issue. So there is potentially some opportunity to put together this plan, present it as a mitigation to FEMA for reimbursement rather than just going in and trying to replace what's already there. Commissioner Farr?
Commissioner Chair, I think that the septic systems themselves are not a community system, so I'm not sure that FEMA will look at it that way. Obviously, if a community has a water system, then when you do the public side, then they work on that, and there's a process for alternative projects that you could put in something else equivalent. But I'm not sure, and we certainly can ask our the state partners who work with FEMA to ask that question to see if there is actually, which would be cool, instead of putting septic system in, that they could work towards a treatment system. But I'm not sure from the conversations I've been a part of that we've seen that path yet.
Yeah, that's good to know. I think we're having parallel conversations. It would be nice to just do it together. Sorry, Commissioner Farr, go ahead.
No need to apologize, Chair Buck. Thank you. That was the most important insertion. Chair, I have a couple of things to say. First is to Tim Lowy and Councillor Lowy. You and I have been working together for more than 25 years now. And in that quarter of a century, I've learned and come to really appreciate ability and also the conclusions you draw. I count on you for a lot of different things, Tim, and I want to thank you for being there as long as you have. You know, a couple of things that you have said, I'm going to underscore so that people really hear from a second voice what you have said already. The first thing I've already quoted, you said, you indicated that the school district is in favor of adding a sanitary system so that Blue River can grow and expand and bring in other opportunities which cannot happen without a sanitary system. The second thing you said is the employment base is tourism and service. Opportunities for employment that include research and manufacturing are in the early stages of possibility and may or may not happen. But Tim, what you're looking at is the future of Blue River. And the first thing that I know you are concerned about is the people who historically have lived there. That as we develop Blue River, redevelop Blue River into a place that is a better place to live than it ever was, and a more environmentally friendly place than it had evolved into. We need to, as you know, pay close attention to the people who have already lived there. And as we attract new economic opportunities to Blue River, which I believe is in the future, that we make certain that we're not attracting large transplant dollars that drive up the cost of housing, as we have seen in Deschutes County, as we've seen in Florence, as we've seen in Tillamook County. So that Blue River, as we develop, will retain the characteristics that even though the landscape has changed significantly, of course, that Blue River retains the characteristics that attracted people there in the first place, and that the people who have historically lived there are the first ones served. So thank you, Tim, for all of the work you do, and I am looking forward to watching you and Austin and Patrick and Mary and the others work together to find solutions.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate, oh yes, Patrick, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Chair Buck. I just, I'd ask you guys to, in the construct of this conversation around Blue River and economic development, when you're driving around, take note of Dollar General stores. Okay, take note of the Dollar General stores. Over the last couple of years, Dollar General has figured out that urban unincorporated communities can accommodate 9,000 and 10,000 square foot buildings, and they have really aggressively located many Dollar General stores in urban unincorporated communities. They have failed in their attempt to locate Dollar Generals in rural communities for the most part. Just give you an idea of the difference. And I would just offer, as Blue River contemplates increasing economic development opportunities, I believe it will be more difficult to ensure that you have that local connection. I just want to make that point, because Dollar General, not to pick on Dollar General, but that is a really contemporary land use and business activity that has been targeting not only our unincorporated communities, but also our smaller cities. It just gives you a good idea of, you know, would a Dollar General be a good fit in Blue River? I mean, some would say probably yes, it's a kind of a general store. Others would probably, you know, shudder at the notion of having, you know, a neon brand, that sign that, you know, has nothing to do with the McKenzie River locating there. And you can do some good community development work through design standards, but you can only do so much design work if, you know, the county is overseeing building permits, you know, in a community 20 or 30 miles away. That really is a better conversation for the incorporation piece. Like if Blue River really wanted to have a strong design element to its downtown, then, you know, a city, quite frankly, does a better job managing that type of granular detail than, say, a county does from, you know, Amber's crew from 30 miles up the road could possibly do. I just wanted to add that because the Dollar General is kind of a good way of seeing the difference between it would not fit in the rural community, but it is a good fit in an unincorporated, urban unincorporated community.
Chair Buck, Patrick, thank you for that response. That is a part of my point exactly, that it needs to retain its local element as much as possible.
Thank you. Commissioner Boswich.
I just want to add to Patrick's comments. I just got back from rural Kentucky, and there were Dollar Generals in some of the smallest little towns in the middle of nowhere, and they just stood out like a sore thumb. And in fact, there was one in this town that's spelt Yosemite, but the locals all there pronounce it Yosemite. I'm serious. That's what that they call the town, the Yosemite. I think it has something to do with the Mennonite population in the area. And this town, unincorporated town, couldn't have been more than 100 people. And there's this huge Dollar General sitting on the rural highway there, and sticking out like a sore thumb. And I don't know if that's what Blue River really wants their vision to be. So that there is some thoughts to take care to what you wish for. Because we just got a new one out here in Veneta, but it doesn't quite stick out sitting right, you know, close to the Weimar and Ray's, you know.
Jay, there's a Willamette in Ohio.
Thank you, everybody. As you can see, commissioners, we have a great crew of folks that have been chewing on this particular subject for quite some time. And I think, oddly enough, with the fire, we have different opportunities that present themselves and one that might be a viable option. And so hopefully we'll just keep checking back with the board, Austin, as it progresses. And with that, we will move on to our next work session item for today. We'll be on item 18, Public Works, which is a work session on updating the land use and building code permit requirements and fees for residents impacted by a holiday farm fire, and an order 20-11-04-01 in the matter of adding 3 full-time FTEs in Fund 570 within the Department of Public Works to prioritize and expedite permits necessary for the holiday farm fire recovery efforts. And with us is Keir Miller, our LMD manager.
Thank you, Chair Buck, and good morning, commissioners. This is the first time I've shared my screen, so I just want to make sure you are able to see it. I can't tell. Is a PowerPoint presentation on there?
We can see your screen, but not the PowerPoint. Oh, there we go.
Okay, great. Let me just get this started for you. Okay, there we go. So thanks again and good morning. Before I get started, I want to introduce a couple of folks who are here with us that will assist in this presentation. Amber Bell is going to stay on the line with us through this. I'll just mention that Amber is now officially our new Lane County Planning Director, so congratulations to her. She's been in that role in an interim capacity for several months and been doing a great job. So glad to have her and her expertise here. We're also trying to get Steve McGuire on the line. I'm not sure if Diana, if he's able to log in yet. We've got a couple of folks drop off. Steve McGuire is our.
Steve McGuire's now on with audio.
Great.
I can talk, but I can't see. I'm not visible. I can't do the webcam, but that's okay. You know what I look like.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Annie Clark's also on the line. We anticipate there may be some legal questions that come up. So we're here today to talk about Lane County Land Management's activity, response, and role as it pertains to permitting within the area impacted by the Holiday Farm fire. There's quite a bit to talk about. Since we originally requested this work session with the board, there's been additional items that the board has asked us to look into regarding fee waivers, our processing, and we're happy to talk about all that. So this might be kind of an omnibus discussion, but my main objective is to kind of fill the board in on a number of things. First, I want to talk about some of the challenges as we see it to timely recovery in the McKenzie Valley, talk about a number of the strategies that land management is currently implementing to help expedite permitting for impacted residents. We will these, and then attached to your board packet is a board order. Land management is making a request for the addition of 3 new positions to help assist with this effort. We'll talk about some of the significant rulemaking that's occurred at the state level. Amber will discuss some of the temporary DLCD rule changes that have been made, which I think will provide a major benefit to impacted residents. And then finally, we'll have some time for questions. So now that we've done a number of case studies and reviewed sort of what's occurred in other jurisdictions that have suffered catastrophic fires like this, and I'll point out that recovery is a very slow process. And unfortunately, in a number of the communities that we looked at, even 5 years down the road, the recovery rate at which people rebuild dwellings can be 15%, 25% at max. I mean, some of these communities just really don't recover like they were prior. There's a number of reasons that play into this. Not all of them are related to permitting. The economic resiliency of the community, the residents' perception about risk, the number of folks who lost homes that were in age or in retirement where they've just decided to pack up and not rebuild. There's a number of things that can impact the recovery and redevelopment rate, but permitting is a major part of that. We see a number of potential challenges to speedy recovery in the watershed. And I want to just, start off by saying that we're obviously committed to trying to resolve these challenges, moving ahead and helping victims of the fire rebuild as quickly as possible. Some of the land use issues that we've identified, which some have been addressed already through the DLC rulemaking, has to do with the ability of residents in a forest zone to replace their dwellings. There was some question as to whether or not an individual lost their dwelling would be able to replace it outright, or if they would need to go through a separate land use process. Amber will discuss that a little bit. There's a major concern regarding the period it takes to redevelop a property. A number of the homes that were impacted, for example, the majority were in rural residential zone land. If those houses cannot be rebuilt within 1 year under the current policies and rules, we're basically looking at that piece of land like it is vacant and undeveloped, and we have to demonstrate that the property, for example, is a legal lot. And there's some issues and potential risks to redevelopment there. 1 year is not a realistic timeline for individuals to rebuild. We're coming into the wet season. Just securing contractors is a challenge. And obviously the permitting process takes a long time. So there are some initiatives that are happening to try to address that. That's the single biggest concern that I have, that I've seen in looking at some of the issues. And all of the issues, just so you know, are laid out in more detail in attachment 2 to your packet. There's a table there that sort of describes some of these potential pitfalls. This is the major one. It does appear that this issue is not being addressed through the rulemaking at the state level. However, there are 2 separate efforts at the legislature that hopefully will be looking into this. I'm aware that Senators Beyer and Prozansky are aware of this issue, and there may be some emergency legislation that comes up hopefully within the next few weeks that could address this particular problem. In addition, Oregonians in Action has been working with the Legislative Council to potentially introduce a bill in the regular session that could address this concern as well. The other issues that pop up have to do with the fact that the majority of the development impacted is right along the river, and there's riparian overlay zones that have certain protections, and of course, floodplain and floodway concerns, which the board has discussed and will discuss more. As of right now, I don't see these as barriers that would prohibit redevelopment. I want to make that clear. Individuals in the riparian zone will be able to replace dwellings in the same footprint. They may even be able to expand beyond that footprint. It just takes a separate land use review process known as riparian modification, which is somewhat like a variance. They need to be able to demonstrate that they haven't impacted over the allotted amount of space within that protected riparian zone. So moving beyond just the land use issues, I'll point out that land management has always been a fairly lean division. We operate on fees primarily. We don't have a lot of depth or resiliency in staff levels to take on a new workload. We are currently, we've changed our business operations due to COVID. Since the customer service lobby is now closed, a lot of our transacting with customers has gone online and over the phone. And we've seen, over 100% increase in call volumes, and just the permitting process in general has somewhat slowed down due to the sort of back and forth nature of the permit review when we can't sit down and talk with somebody prior to submitting a plan. So we do have a number of efforts underway that we'll talk about that are trying to expedite our permitting process. But I just want the board to be aware that sort of fundamental lack of staffing, that if we do see a big resurgence, or I'm sorry, a big push for permits resulting from this fire, that will be a challenge. So I want to talk about the current efforts that we've been engaged in since the fire. There's a number of them. The first and foremost is that we have prioritized all permit inquiries on our message lines and our, as well as building permits related to the Holiday Farm fire. So we've made a decision, we understand that this might have some impacts on other residents, but we're trying to mitigate those impacts. But the individuals who lost homes in the fire, we view as different than those folks who may be somewhere in the planning process or the redevelopment process, who have a place to live, first of all, and are aware of sort of the timelines that it takes to obtain a building permit or a land use approval. The folks in the McKenzie Valley are without homes. They weren't, through no fault of their own, and quite suddenly. So the office is attempting to prioritize all of those permits. We are hiring, which we'll talk about, additional temporary staff. We have brought on additional temporary staff to try to limit the impacts to our other permits that are, have already been submitted. So that is ongoing. In addition, we are working with staff and architects and developers who've been involved with the redevelopment of Paradise, California after the Camp Fire. We're attempting to obtain some ready-built plans, and these would be essentially simple home designs that are pre-engineered, and we would make available for free to residents who need, who can't afford plans or want to have some assurances that they can move through the permitting process quickly. These would be plans that we would have on hand that we can make available, that our plans examiners and inspectors are familiar with. So the thought there is those would move through plan review fairly quickly. We're also developing a quick start building permit review process, which would enable folks to submit plans, and as plan review is occurring, begin work up to a certain phase of the project without the building permit plans being final. So they could move through, rough framing, for example. They could get the foundation in and start to make progress on the development, the building, before the permit is actually issued. In addition, we have made the decision to waive emergency RV permits, as well as any associated building permit fees, such as electrical or sanitation or mechanical permits. The emergency RV is one of the best and fastest options to get folks housed who've lost their stick-built or manufactured home. Moving an RV back on the site allows them to be on the property while their home is being rebuilt, or they can site it on a friend or a family member's property and live there pretty quickly. So that provides a really good opportunity to house some of these impacted folks, and it's a very popular permit type. So we've done some analysis of the loss in revenue with that, and we've determined that that is something that can be absorbed through land management reserves, and we're currently waiving those fees. In addition, we've set up a satellite office for land management up at the McKenzie Fire and Rescue Station in Leesburg. We're currently staffing that 1 day a week, Fridays from 10 to 2, primarily trying to assist folks with obtaining those emergency RV permits. That's our focus right now. As things evolve, I'm sure we will increase capacity there and be able to answer more questions related to building, rebuilding, and planning questions as well. These are just a couple of photos of the permit office up at the fire station. This office is being advertised broadly on the Facebook Live sessions for the community. It's advertised on our website, and as well as at the Old Fish Hatchery site, where there's also some other county and agency offices co-located. As I mentioned, we've hired a number of part-time positions. We've brought on a senior plans examiner who's retired from the city of Eugene to help with plan review. We've brought on a retired county planning director to help with the land use review, and a number of administrative staff. We're also working with the Home Builders Association in Lane County. We've met with them twice to try to identify concerns that they have, ideas and issues for how we can help speed up the permitting process. We have looked at loosening requirements about how inspections can take place, if licensed engineers or surveyors could be permitted to conduct some inspections. There's pros and cons to that. We do have, right now, we are enabling surveyors, for example, to do some of the site inspections to allow for a structure to be replaced within a riparian area and create, a site plan of properties that have been impacted by the fire. So we can go ahead and start the planning approval process for those homes in a riparian area. We're also trying to leverage technology and looking at LiDAR and other data to be able to alleviate the need for site visits to determine, where an exact footprint of a home site is. This will reduce costs and timelines for impacted residents. We have provided support at the Multi-Agency Resource Center and continue to provide as much information as possible through, the resources that I mentioned, the website and the satellite office upriver. We're also working, and this is a process that we started before the Holiday Farm fire, We're working to improve our process workflow in light of COVID. When we initially closed the customer service center, we did not envision that it would be closed for this long. Staff almost overnight kind of put together a process to continue to issue building permits. You know, the basic approach is that individuals drop off their permits or email them in. There is no over-the-counter interaction with them. We review the permits, determine what information is missing, and then there's a sort of continual back and forth with the homeowner or developer to try to get all the information that we need. That's taking a lot of time and it's slowing down the process. So we are attempting to create a triage team, which we've done, that essentially tries to move a building permit through each step of the process and mimic the way a permit would flow through our lobby when it was open. And that's enabling us to get out some same-day permits and to really issue those sort of low-hanging fruit permits pretty quickly, and then move those permits that are going to take more time to the right people faster than it had been before. In addition, you know, we're going to talk about additional staff. We've assessed our budget and needs and identified which areas have needs to be able to meet the demands of the work. And then finally, one of the more interesting and exciting things we're doing, we're working with technology services and the public information officer. There's a new website that's been developed and just was launched in the last couple of days, the McKenzie Rebuilds website. That's going to have a number of tools and resources for impacted residents. A big part of that website will be a portion about rebuilding and information to help folks track where they are in the permit process. And I'll just show a couple of quick screenshots. This is all still a work in progress, but we are trying to, you know, we've moved into the Squarespace realm, which provides more flexibility than the sort of standard county web software. It allows a little bit more user-friendly interface, and we're trying to make this whole process with an experience for residents is easy to track. Devin Ashbridge has been great. She's reviewing, you know, some of our really complex jargony processes, and we're trying to break those down into really easy to track flow charts that will assist residents in understanding what they need to do and where they're at and what the status is of their permit. There's a number of tools that are being developed, as I mentioned, a number of interactive maps, options for individuals to look up their property, identify past permits, understand their zoning. A number of the tools that currently exist on the county's platform, we're trying to pull all those into one place and sort of make it simpler. Right now, we noticed that a lot of the consultants and engineers and those types of folks really know how to use those tools, but average you know, folks struggle with them. So we're really trying to make those more approachable. In addition, this is just an example of one of the tools that we're building. This would allow individuals to just quickly type in their address, pull up a map of their property, and then immediately see a drop down of all the permits that are on their property with some flow charts that show them the status of where their permit is at and how it's moving through the system. This is still in draft form. We are kind of fleshing this out a bit, but we think this will be a really helpful part of this tool. It's actually modeled off of something that's occurring down in Santa Rosa, California. After the big fire that they had there, there's been a number of interesting tools that they've created, which we are trying to leverage and use for our residents. One of the other pieces to the technology that's really interesting is sort of a dashboard or a community redevelopment, you know, tracking interface. We're leveraging the use of the Tableau software to create some interesting dashboards that over time, as the community redevelops, we'll be able to track those metrics and see, you know, at what stage is the community at in redevelopment, which parcels are still undeveloped, which ones are hung up in the permitting process, which ones are complete. And this software can help us track a number of things, such as, you know, number of permits issued, average days to permit issuance, and we can identify areas that may be struggling or falling behind. So that's essentially all of the activities that we're currently working on. I want to pass it over to Amber, who can discuss some of the initiatives that are happening at the state level, which are positive. But I will pause now to see if there are any questions at this point.
Commissioner Farr.
Kira, thank you. Very thorough presentation. And I was able to jump onto our new community toolkit portion of our website and found Mackenzie Rebuilds. Good work integrating that with with our existing platform. My question, you've got a lot of questions that other commissioners may have. My question is regarding the fact that Lane County, that one of the problems is that counties generally aren't able to make building codes. We have to follow and enforce state rules. So in order to do things that are kind of novel and unique, we have to work within the state rules and be as innovative as we can. And one thing I've been interested in is how do we incorporate particularly mobile tiny homes to put them in place as both, and your thought about this, and I know Dan's thought about this, and I'm certain that Amber's been dwelling on it a little bit. It's not a pun. So the temporary, sometimes mobile, sometimes not mobile, but sometimes on wheels, tiny homes can address emergency transitional and ultimately become permanent dwellings. And it is one of the weird areas that there isn't a clear code at the state level. How do we handle this? I don't know that we have questions on it right now, but I'm going to continue to focus on that because I believe we have a tremendous opportunity to establish a way to provide what is emergency, ultimately transitional, and then permanent dwellings with the same piece of equipment, with the same mobile home. I don't know that there's much you can answer that with right now, Kier, but I wanted to register that that still is a high item of my interest, not just mine. I speak for a lot of people there, not just in the Mackenzie, but beyond that. And Kier, thanks again. Your work is tremendous. And thank you, Amber, and congratulations.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr. You did articulate the issue pretty well, so I'll try to provide a response since it's kind of at the forefront right now. You know, we view tiny homes as a really great opportunity and tool. Obviously, they can be put together quickly and at low cost and can really be a part of the housing strategy. As you mentioned, we are within the constraints of the Oregon land use system and the building codes. One of the challenges that, and this is with the statewide system, is really has to do with the density at which rural parcels can be developed. And the state does not distinguish between, a 10,000 square foot stick-built mansion and a tiny home on a parcel. It's a single family dwelling, and if the zoning allows for one single family dwelling, unfortunately, a tiny home is viewed the same way as a large home is viewed. That's just part of the land use system right now. I don't want to discount the options for tiny homes. I do think that they could play a really valuable role, especially in some of the sort of emergency housing, temporary housing, and definitely within city limits. They can for sure play a role in that. There are a number of ways that we look at tiny homes, and I know that Steve McGuire, the building official, is on the line, and if the board would like at this time, or we can hold off to the end, I think he has some slides which we can show that kind of differentiate in the building codes how those different types of structures are viewed. So I'll just leave it to the chair whether or not we want to get into that right now.
Chair Buck, Kira, thank you for that response. And that it illustrates my point that the state code looks at a 250 square foot home as the same as a 10,000 square foot home. That is absolutely ridiculous. When we're looking at ways, and we talked about this at length yesterday, we need front doors, we need housing. We need to put every effort that we can possibly into providing housing. Thanks, Kira, for that response. And I'll look forward to hearing from Mr. McGuire.
If you would like to pause and have Mr. McGuire go over that before we resume, that's fine with me.
Let me pull your slide up, Steve.
Commissioner Burney, did you have a question?
Yes, I just simply thank you, Chair. I simply wanted to not only echo Commissioner Farr's point, but also, Commissioner, perhaps we could incorporate this into our Legislative Affairs Committee meeting next week. Thank you.
Alex is listening, I know.
So, Steve, I'll
The next
put you
slide
right
here, I
here.
think would be a good place to start.
Okay.
And, Commissioner Farley mentioned being able to take the tiny home or a small structure and be able to look at that. You also mentioned that the state doesn't have requirements about tiny homes or codes about tiny homes. Building Codes Division tried to work with that over the years, and they included that into an alternative code, and then they backed out from that because of the difficulty in implementing it. Right now, the state looks at tiny homes either as a permanent structure, meaning the requirements of a dwelling. They look at it as a temporary long-term, which could be, say, an emergency long-term situation. Again, in that situation, it does need to meet the same requirements as a permanent structure. And then we could take a look as a temporary short-term, and more or less like an emergency shelter, or which might be set by the Red Cross. Pretty short-term. The other aspects that we could look at would be transitional housing, and that might be a very viable way to look at those, but they're really constructed to different standards. Being able to move from a tiny home that's being used for transitional housing or even emergency housing is going to be difficult because they meet such different standards and they have such different oversight. And the oversight, I think, is the biggest thing. What kind of life safety do we have? In transitional housing or emergency housing, emergency housing is not well defined by code, and there are some latitudes for modifications to the codes that are there for those things. But if I take a home, whether it's tiny or moderate size or large, making sure that the wiring is done correctly, the plumbing is done correctly, the mechanical, the hardware meets the requirements, that they're really taking a look at the life safety issues. You still want to have those in a tiny home, and that requires some regulation, some oversight. Because what I have seen is tiny homes that have had oversight on a national level, but they really just meet the standards that were specified in the plans. And that may be something like, oh, we want to build this out of 2x4 walls, or we want to build it out of 2x2 walls, or we want to have R2 insulation. There really is not a standard that really addresses the concerns of life safety or energy efficiencies that the other codes are trying to look at. And so trying to establish that, Building Codes Division did fall back to those three categories: permanent. Well, let me go to the next slide, Stu. Here, go down to that one. So in Building Codes Division, they look at something that's site-built, and that is regulated by the local jurisdiction or by the State Building Code Division. You have manufactured homes, which historically were known as mobile homes, but through legislation, they got renamed as manufactured homes because it sounded better. But those are ones that do have significant oversight. Both the ones on the side have oversight from the local jurisdiction and from having an inspection program. Manufactured homes, they have a program where the manufacturing facility does coordinate with Building Codes Division to end up with an approved product with an insignia on it. They meet certain requirements. And then you have recreational vehicles. They also are manufactured and put into as a recreational vehicle. They're not intended for long-term use. They are for recreational use. And so that's kind of what the standards are. And there are different standards as far as the amount of use and the intent of the use. The familiarity of the owner to be in there, whether it's a homeowner or not. Now the tiny homes, right now, you pick one of those categories: site-built, manufactured, or an RV or park model. Park model is built pretty much to the same standards as the RV, and it can go into a manufactured home park or to a recreational vehicle park. So you can do a tiny home to one of those standards. Unfortunately, right now, a lot of tiny homes are built to no standards at all. And it's very difficult to assure that they meet any level of fire and life safety. Now, there are a lot of people that think about that and incorporate that into that facility. And there are some people who just don't understand those issues at all. And so when you look at tiny homes, how is it constructed? The buyer is really buyer beware situation in those circumstances. So when I take a look at tiny homes, there's a lot of definitions that go along with it. And so really, I think that it would be nice to put aside the label of tiny homes and really address what it is we're trying to look at.
Chair Buck, Ms. McGuire, thank you for that thorough explanation, but it really illustrates what I'm saying about being stuck in the mud of regulations that make it difficult for us to do what is logical, reasonable, and will meet all public safety, all personal safety requirements. There are tiny homes out there that are doing it today and that have served as transitional homes and become tiny homes. We have to find a way to yes on this while continually looking at all these no reasons that are illustrated in the diagrams you just placed forward. So lots of no's out there. Let's turn them into yeses.
I think that there are some latitude in taking a look at the tiny homes for emergency situations, transitional housing, and there is quite a bit of latitude in looking at that. Converting that to a permanent situation, you're trying to then compare something that meets a much lower standard to something that meets a higher standard. And so I think that's where the dilemma is there the expectation that because the home is tiny, that doesn't need to meet the same standards, that's not as important to get people out of the building, that doesn't need to be as fire resistant, or that the wiring doesn't need to meet the same standard of safety with GIF outlets, with circuit breakers that work, with heating systems that are UL listed. Those are the things that they're very creative, but they don't necessarily meet what we are looking for in a permanent home.
Which means we have to find the ones that do meet those standards. That's not expensive, doesn't have to be, and doesn't have to be restricted.
That's correct. I agree with you, Commissioner.
Thank you. I just want to correct one statement regarding the manufactured mobile home change in name. It wasn't just because it sounds better. There are legitimate reasons that manufactured housing is now named manufactured housing. If it's built on the site, it's built on the site. If it's built in a manufacturing facility, it's built in a manufacturing facility. And they really aren't mobile, as the original term alludes to. So I just wanted to make that particular point.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Bozich.
Thank you. Just before we leave the subject of tiny homes, I want to remind the board, we were close to getting a bill over the line on accessory dwelling units in RR. And if that bill were passed, and maybe we can, and this is something for the vice chair and Commissioner Farr to think about when they get into their legislative meeting, if that bill were to be passed and we had folks build tiny homes as temporary housing on RR, and if they built them to either the manufactured or stick-built on-site standards, they could remain as an accessory dwelling unit if we could get this ADU bill passed. And then there wouldn't be that issue of having to take something down that might be a little bit more expensive because it was built to code and correct code, even though it might be small. And what those folks might consider a temporary living situation. So one of the things that we might want to think about as part of this whole effort is continuing to push for that ADU in our these temporary facilities to stay as permanent and become the age in place structure for folks, or the another front door in our communities, and add to our total density throughout without adding a whole lot of demand on infrastructure. So just a thought while we're talking tiny homes.
Commissioner Burnham.
Am I the only one hearing an echo?
It was on there for a moment.
Okay. That was very common sense, Commissioner Bozovich. I don't see how that relates to this discussion whatsoever. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, and Chair, maybe you can help me, I did not AOC last year pass support of the legislation that Commissioner Bozovich is talking about?
They did. I
yeah.
testified on that particular bill. It just
Right.
because things didn't move in that session, it didn't get through.
Right. So you are heard, sir. I would like to comment on another point. It seems as resources are scarce, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm just giving you a perception here, but some of the areas you are improving systems probably could have been, were needing improvement anyway. It's just that some of them were driven by high demand, scarce resources. I'm still, even recently, I'm starting to get a few, like 4, and I'll forward them to you as I process them. Desperation calls from people that don't fit in this category that are really having issues with the permitting process to the point where they're despondent and calling their commissioner because they don't know what other recourse they have. So obviously there are some issues there. In discussing tools, as we discussed yesterday, regarding other tools, people have to learn how to use tools. And I'm sure you've thought that through, and I'm sure a part of when this is actually available for public use, there will also be, through existing community groups, opportunities to train folk on how to use them, where they are navigating through them, because really you're pushing a lot of process to the end user in a very efficient way, if in fact these occur as hoped for. And I must say that I agree with Commissioner Farr that even some of this discussion exemplifies that we need to partner with our staff to create more flexible ways to get to yes. I'll give you a quick example. The gentleman that spoke earlier, I think his name's Stephen. Forgive me, sir. I don't see you, and I hear you. In a tiny home, when you look at how does a person get out, it's a lot easier than in a 4,000 square foot home. And yet we have the same sort of entry exit kind of requirements that perhaps ought to be revisited. And there are several examples of that. So we're really going to need to figure it out. And I know you all want the same thing we do. And thank you, Chair. Those are the only points I want to make.
Thank you. All right, Kiera, I'll move it back to you or Amber to continue on with the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Yeah, at this time, I'll just pass it over to Amber and she can walk through that DLCD rulemaking that just occurred.
Thanks, Kier. So Department of Land Conservation and Development Commission met on October 22nd, and we've been tracking their temporary rulemaking process. There's a lot about the temporary rules that they have approved as of October 22nd that looks really promising for the Mackenzie River Valley area. And I see Patrick is on the line here too. So we've been tracking that. I will say our understanding, and Patrick, please correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is the rules are not yet effective or published. We'll monitor when they are. So everything in your packet today and that is presented on these slides is based on the draft rules that were presented to LCDC on October 22nd. I'll also mention that we're still confirming exactly what steps may need to be taken at a local level to make these fully effective. There are some provisions in the temporary rules that specify a comprehensive plan amendment or code amendment is not required, but each of the temporary rules does not have that sort of exemption. So we're working to confirm that. I'll also mention before getting into the specific temporary rules that these aren't a waiver to permitting requirements. But there's a number of great temporary uses that are in these rules. One is for rural residential zone areas. There is a list of temporary residential uses that are allowed, that would be allowed for sheltering or interim housing when a emergency is declared. And those are temporary residential uses that would be in conjunction with an existing or dwelling that existed on July 5th, 2020. There are certain standards that would apply, such as the temporary residential uses would need to be located outside of a flood, geologic, or wildfire hazard area to the extent possible. There's a time limitation of when they would need to be converted into an allowable use. It's 30 months of the date of the declaration, and then there's a provision for a local county to extend that by a 12-month period if it's found that there's still a need for housing, in short. But specifically in rural residential areas, the temporary residential uses that are listed are a single manufactured dwelling, use of an existing building or buildings, a single yurt, up to 3 recreational vehicles, or up to 3 fabric structures, tents, or similar combinations. There is also a provision for temporary campgrounds and staging sites for non-hazardous debris when there has been a wildfire and the governor has declared a emergency declaration for a wildfire for conflagration. Kier, would you mind to go to the next slide? So earlier in the presentation, one of the things that we identified is with regards to land use potential pitfalls, is that in the forest zones, there is a provision that says for a dwelling to be replaced in the forest zones, the dwelling has, and then there's certain habitability features listed like interior wiring for interior lights, plumbing, heating, intact walls and a roof, but that all hinges on the dwelling has those features. And so our understanding is that means that the dwelling would need to exist. So something that's really promising about these temporary rules is that there's a provision that for forest zone areas that lists that a dwelling that was destroyed by a wildfire may be replaced within 60 months. And then you look at that habitability criteria still, but it's based on when the dwelling was in existence. And then furthermore, there's a provision that allows temporary housing for the owner of record documented at the time of the fire to live on the property. Again, there's a temporary staging site for non-hazardous debris when there's been a declared conflagration. And then there's 2 conditional uses included in the temporary rules. One is a temporary emergency campground, and the other is I think you all are familiar with a temporary medical hardship. There is a definition that's been added that clarifies that a hardship dwelling can also be created by an emergency, such as a wildfire conflagration. Thanks, Karen. So for agricultural lands or exclusive farm zoned areas, the temporary rules are largely similar to what has been approved for forest lands, except that instead of the replacement dwelling provision for forest lands, there's a temporary allowance to replace accessory farm dwellings. And similar to the replacement dwelling provision in the forest zones, there's an allowance for temporary housing until the dwelling's replaced. And then in unincorporated communities, that's the Division 22 rule. Similar to rural residentially zoned areas, there's a provision for temporary residential uses in conjunction with a dwelling that existed on July 5th, 2020. Certain standards apply again. There's slightly more of an allowance for temporary housing units. So there's still the option, and these are either or options. So there's the option of a single manufactured dwelling or use of an existing building or buildings, up to 2 yurts, up to 5 recreational vehicles, or up to 5 fabric structure tents or similar accommodations. And then lastly, the other thing that's unique about the unincorporated communities temporary rules is that transitional housing is allowed, again, subject to certain standards, that's usually allowed in urban growth boundaries, and it's included here for both rural and urban unincorporated communities. So lastly, I'll just add one more thing that, again, there's certain provisions that list that comprehensive plan amendments or code amendments are not required, and we're confirming precisely what we need to do at the local level, but we anticipate that we'll be developing application forms and pursuing any code amendments that are necessary to fully implement this, and we'll make more information available on our website as we confirm those details.
Great, thanks, Amber. So I'll just say with full knowledge that we do have a DLCD rep on the call. I was pretty impressed with the allowances and the creativity that the department came up with in being able to change their rules, which is obviously a much easier process to revise OARs than statute. And I was struck that it was, while obviously it probably doesn't go as far as many people would like, I thought it was pretty generous considering, typically how restrictive the land use process is and the amounts of, emergency homes and things like that could be situated. I think it reflects the nature of this really what was a statewide, coastal emergency that we're dealing with. So thanks for going over those rules. The next thing I wanted to discuss is the issue of permit fee waivers. This was a topic that came up at a board discussion, and staff was directed to add this on to this work session. We have reviewed what is occurring around the state in regards to fee waivers. Obviously, communities want to do everything they can to assist residents who've, gone through such a tragedy. One of the options is obviously, can fees be waived on building permits and land use permits to reduce overall costs for those folks redeveloping. In your packet, I list the counties. I reached out to impacted jurisdictions in the state and got some responses back. Most of them deal with the fires this year, but we did get a response from Grant County that went through a fire back in 2015 as well. Overall, what is being waived by our other counties is, well, I'll start off now. I'll just kind of go through the list. The response I got from Douglas County is that they are not waiving fees. Grant County waived some administrative land use fees, and there were only 43 structures lost in that wildfire. So they waived some land use permits related to that, not building permits. Those fees were offset by the general fund in Grant County. Lincoln County at this time is not offering fee waivers. Lynn County is, but they're basically doing the same thing that we are doing, which is waiving fees on emergency RV permits, but not on longer term building permits. And I'll just mention that this is all subject to change. This was the latest at the time this packet was written. I don't believe any of this has been updated. The one county that is doing significant fee waivers is Marion County, and their board has the waived fees on all building permits needed to be issued for redevelopment and Beachy Fire and the fires up there. And they've estimated that could be a loss in revenue to the building program of $1.2 million. and they have agreed to offset those funds with the general fund in Marion County. So that being said, you can see that most counties are not waiving building permits. One has waived some land use permits. Lynn County, like us, is waiving the emergency RV permits. Marion County is waiving building permit fees, and they're compensating that out of their general fund. I was asked to identify options, revenue sources, if we are going to waive fees. As we've already discussed, land management is primarily fee supported. If the board chooses to waive fees, which I don't think that's, we would recommend against trying to cover those fees out of LMD reserves. We have not yet reached our full reserve target. I think that would put us in a really bad position in terms of long-term sustainability. There are many good reasons why we want to maintain reserves in land management, maintaining staff, obviously, but the turnover rate, or rather the time it takes to train planners and plans examiners when there is a need, if we've lost a bunch of staff and we need to rehire and retool, that takes, a long time, and we can get really behind the eight ball and actually hurt redevelopment in the county if we don't have the staff on hand. So we've been very careful over the last several years building reserves. So I don't view that as a great option to waive fees and offset or supplant with those reserves. The other obvious choices are potentially waiving some of this funding through a combination of video lottery or general fund. Not great news, I know. We've estimated, the potential loss in revenue in land management at $1.4 to $1.9 million. And that's if we took on a similar approach to Marion County, where we essentially gave applicants 5 years to come in and submit plans for redevelopment, with understanding that the majority of those permits won't, probably won't be applied for in that window if looking at, past examples is any indication. So we've kind of estimated that, maybe we'll see 40% of buildings rebuilt. And this cost here is just for the basic building permit revenue that would be lost. It doesn't account for land use fees as well. So I'll leave that there. I'm sure there will be questions and discussion about that, but I'll move on to my final part of the presentation, which involves a request to add 3 additional FTE. As I mentioned, your board packet contains an order. If approved, it would enable the division to hire 3 additional FTE that we predict we will need, especially if we want to prioritize permits for the Holiday Farm fire. These are positions that, down the road, land management would have been coming to the board to seek out, but there's a critical need right now. We've, the county administrator has authorized us through, allowances within the APM to begin recruitment on these positions. If the board does not authorize the creation of the positions, we'll stop that recruitment. But at this time, staff is recommending that the board approve that order and enable us to bring those additional staff on board. I'll close with just a couple of comments. I wanted to circle back around to, the refrain we hear from Commissioner Farr and others often, which is we need to find ways to get to yes, and we need to add more front doors in the county. And I just want to assure the board that, the land management division understands that need. We especially understand the need of individuals to be back in their homes that they lost. I say that coming from the perspective of a land use planner that studied, natural hazards and worked on hazard mitigation projects for a number of years. I don't say it lightly. I do have concerns about redevelopment in areas that are subject to wildfire and flooding, and with potential changes in climate. It seems like these instances can occur, more readily. At that, I also fully understand the desire and need for folks to rebuild, especially individuals who are so connected to the rural landscape where they live and work. we have a number of staff, like many departments and divisions in the county do, who are directly impacted by the wildfire. We had 3 of our building inspectors live right within the burned area. Their properties suffered some damage. Thankfully, none of them lost their homes, but these folks are really connected to the community. We understand that these are our neighbors and coworkers who are impacted, and we are committed to doing everything we can to assist with the redevelopment. With that, I'm free to answer questions or comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Barr.
Kier, I'll go straight to the last thing you said. Thank you for that, and for reminding me, not that I need to be reminded, that you really do pay close attention to doing everything that you can possibly do that is right for the people of Lane County and beyond. And you know that I am personally interested in, I want to, and I will strive to push the limits as far as they will go within the law and within safety. And you and staff are there to help define what those limits are. Not to restrict it, but to define what the upper limits are, the outer limits of what we can do. And that's what we are looking at, and what we need to be looking at this point in time. So I thank you for that. And I thank you for this conversation, because it really is helping to underscore the fact that we do need to push those limits to the very extent that we possibly can to maintain safety, to maintain environmental protection, to maintain public dignity, shall we say. But, you know, we have people in the McKenzie, and not just in the McKenzie, but other places, who are not only trying to rebuild their homes, they're trying to reconstruct their very existence. And, you know, a few dollars, and how you define a few dollars is different to different people at different times, but a few dollars should not be the restriction that keeps them from reconstructing their existence and putting themselves back to where, as close to where they were before. And I know that you're searching for ways to do that, Kier, to waive fees and to find ways to make certain that money is not what keeps people out of their property. I do have only one question, because I think my points have been made fairly solidly. And I think most of us agree that we need to put people back in homes as quickly as possible. The term manufactured dwelling was used a number of times by you, Amber, in the document regarding the OARs, the temporary OARs, manufactured dwelling. And I'm going to presume that a manufactured dwelling includes, I'm not going to use the term mobile home, but a portable type of home. That a manufactured dwelling can be a portable type of home, such as the ones in wheels that are manufactured. They can be placed on a property and either set down on a foundation temporarily, or left on its wheeled chassis. So you can answer me that if there's a question on that. But once again, I'm presuming that manufactured dwelling does include that type of dwelling unit. And once again, thank you. You guys are remarkable. This has been one of the very best work sessions that I've ever attended as an elected official. I will point out one thing very, very quickly. And Patrick, you're listening. Lane Shetterly, who I served with in the legislature on House Revenue, became the director of DLCD. And he always pointed out that the DLCD stands for Department of Land Conservation and, what's that last word? Development. And so it really is making sure that our development is a part that it fits in with all of the other goals that we have. Amber, thank you very much once again.
Thanks, Commissioner. I'm old enough to know Lane, so yeah, appreciate those comments. And you're an amazing commission. I'm honored. I probably shouldn't be speaking here, so apologies, Chair Buck. But you know, this world of Zoom. I'm just going to jump in here. I'm going to support everything that you do. You all are a leader in this state. Your marginal lands, forestry stuff is amazing. You know, I'm kind of a coastal guy. I grew up in Douglas County. Not myself, I'm from Michigan, but in the planning world under Keith Kubik, and never worked for Keith. I was Myrtle Creek's planner for a couple of years, and I learned real quickly about the timber industry and about respecting resource lands and how the statewide planning program fits, you know, really well in the urban areas. And I think fortuitously, I'm one of the few state DLCD guys or whatever that has worked on these rural community rules quite a bit, and these unincorporated community rules quite a bit. And so, you know, a lot of important work to do, but just extremely grateful to have the opportunity to work with you, to serve you all. I'm a Springfield resident, and I feel the pain just like everybody does of climate change and living for weeks among the smoke. And we have to adapt, but we also need to respect the fact that people want to get home. People want to get home. So fantastic work session. Appreciate Austin, you getting me plugged in the committee work, and now with the elected officials. Great opportunity for me to work with you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I love
Chair Buck,
that you bring. Oh, yes, Commissioner Sorensen, I had Commissioner Bozovich in the queue, and then I can call on you.
thank you so much.
Thank you,
Just wanna
Chair.
click-
Sorry, Kier, did you want to jump in there?
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that we responded to Commissioner Farr's question about how the manufactured home definition worked. And I just wanted to say that I believe you're referring to these homes that are on wheels, tiny homes. I think within the allowances of the OAR, those sorts of structures fit within one of these definitions, maybe not a manufactured dwelling, but the use of existing dwellings or RVs. I think within there's likely latitude that those types of structures that you're referring to can be used as this temporary. If the state is agreeing to allow a fabric structure or a tent to be used as a temporary emergency housing, I can't understand why one of those tiny homes on wheels or something like that wouldn't be used. So I just want to clarify that.
Thank you. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. First, I want to quickly state my support for the addition of the 3 FTE. I think that's critical to keeping our permit department moving and in general for the entire county's sake. I want to jump back a little bit to some of the land use side of this whole thing, because that's been a real concern of mine from very early on in the fire. And I sent a document. I asked some folks that are out there in the land use consulting world to help generate for me about some of the concerns in various zones that we might be running into. And one of them in particular, and you touched on it a little bit, but I want to just go back to it, is this idea of the 1-year replacement time for RR dwellings. My understanding is if there is actually a legal lot already there that's been determined to be legal, that time limitation is not necessary. It's only where there's not a defined legal lot. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, the way we would look at a property that's been getting a weird echo there.
I'll mute.
Sorry. So, once a home has been off a property for over a year, yeah, we basically have to look at that as if it's vacant land. And when we do that, that's when we have to dig into how the parcel was created. If it's a parcel that's, out of a, recognized partition or a subdivision lot or something clean like that, or we have a legal lot verification on file, it's not an issue. But if the history of that lot is unknown, the code basically says that, you can get a single family dwelling on a lot or parcel. So that kicks in this requirement that we establish that is a legal lot. So that is an accurate statement.
Yeah, so that's probably the biggest thing I'm hearing from folks upriver is the concern about that 12-month window. Because if it starts out with that, and then there's a separate issue about an interpretation of whether or not folks have to go through legal lot verification when they apply for replacement dwelling if they don't have an existing legal lot status. And whether that runs parallel to a building permit or has to be done up front. So there's some real concern about timing, but we approved an extension of non-conforming use where they could be not use that use for up to 2 years from 1 do we have the local ability to extend that 12-month, or does that have to be legislative?
So that's a good question. First, I'll just reiterate that I think this is an issue that, is being looked at the legislative level. So hopefully there's a solution there. I think this is a big issue for everyone, and folks are well aware of it. But to get to your question, I'm going to ask Amber to weigh in on that. I know she's looked at this, and Andy Clark should be on the line as well. I believe there's some complications. We were able to do that with Oregon Country Fair, but for reasons that are escaping me, I think that's may be problematic in this instance, and I'll let them weigh in.
Sure. So unfortunately, I believe that there was latitude to increase the time frame for when a non-conforming use is discontinued or abandoned, but not for when the case where a non-conforming use is restored, and that time frame comes out of statute. And so we believe that there would need to be some sort of legislative fix for the 1-year time frame that applies to restoration of non-conforming use.
So Amber, that's part of the non-conforming use criteria in statute. Is that, where does that
Correct.
particular provision come from? Okay.
Sure. Yes, it's ORS Chapter 215. I believe it's 215-130 sub 6.
Is that the same? Is that the same thing that our legislators are already working on for an emergency or interim short session?
That's correct, Chair. I spoke with Alex Kyler yesterday, and he confirmed that that's something that we believe is going to be taken up in the emergency session. And if not in the emergency session, there's a separate process that's been promoted by Oregonians in Action. My understanding that's at Legislative Council, and that would be taken up in the regular session.
So I just wanted to confirm that that had to be done legislatively. So a separate sort of question on the same issue: could the board, through legislative action of the board, confirm legal lot status on any structure that we could determine that there's been a dwelling in place for more than 10 years and avoid this whole issue?
Mm-hmm.
And grant legal lot status to most of the homes that got destroyed in the fire, and then the 12-month clock wouldn't be ticking.
Yeah. That's a big question. I know land management several years ago went through an effort to try to legislatively or broadly designate legal lots that met certain criteria. The legal counsel at the time, Stephen Voorhees, took a close look at that, and I could try to dig up why that was a challenge, but what a legal lot is, as you know, Commissioner Bozovich, it's defined in ORS 92. There's specific definitions of what sort of parcels meet that definition, created through a subdivision or partition or verified to have existed and meet the applicable zoning regulations at the time the parcel was, deeded off. So I think it would be a real challenge you'd have to somehow demonstrate that by legislatively approving these dwellings or these parcels that have had dwellings on them for 10 years, they met that criteria. And I think that would be challenging because there's things that go beyond having just the dwelling on the parcel. How was the parcel? Did it meet the acreage requirements at the time it was created for the zone it was in, et cetera? But Andy may have other thoughts on that as well. I think that would be a challenge.
Yeah, I'll weigh in real quick. This is Andy Clark. I just was looking at that document that some of the planners or attorneys sent out, Commissioner Bozovich. I just received it and forwarded from Bill Close. That part confused me, the legislative approval of legal lots. I don't know what process that would be, and I'm not sure you could do it in what I'm thinking as a legislative function. It's going to be a quasi-judicial action, whether it's one lot or 20 similar situated lots. I think it's always going to be a quasi judicial action. And you would have to make the same sort of findings in that process as you would for individually developed lot. And so I'm not sure it would save anything, because you'd have to look at the situation on each lot individually as well. I'm happy to chat with some of those consultants or attorneys about what their ideas are in that respect, but I don't understand exactly how it would be workable here.
So I believe what they wanted when they said legislatively was for us to adopt a code amendment, which the board would be able to do under our powers to the county code, not necessarily just legislatively deem a bunch of lots that way, but have actual code that says if you can prove your house was there for 10 years, you're considered to have a legal lot. But that I understand the issue, though, that you still have underlying statute that we have to meet, and it gets confusing. But I was looking for what's our fallback if we don't get the state legislative fix, because that 12-month issue is causing a lot of concern for folks. Because there's a lot of the houses that that were destroyed that are zoned do not have a legal lot status because they've been there for 40 or 50 years, and they're really concerned about got to go through all the hazmat, debris removal, apply for building go through design, apply for building permits. 12 months goes away really fast, and then they're back to a land use process that's appealable, which is a legal lot verification. And then how much more time are you adding to somebody developing? So it's something I have great concern about. I'm glad our local delegations focused on it and looking at doing something in emergency, but I want to explore every way we have to maybe skin that cat a bit. Are there any other zones where there's a clock that starts with, when for a replacement dwelling besides the RR?
Yeah, I think any of the zones that specify that development has to be on a legal lot, you'd be looking at that same issue, because essentially it's sort of a review. If the property is vacant, the non-conforming use standards kick in when the property's been vacant for over 12 months. So Amber, chime in if I haven't gotten that quite right, but I believe it's probably a number of zones: commercial, residential, farming, forest as well.
I apologize. My internet cut out there for about 2 minutes, so I missed that piece of it.
Okay.
The question when a legal lot verification is required.
The question is, are there other zone parcels that'll be in the same predicament as the rural residential zoned properties if they aren't rebuilt within 1 year? Do they have to then go through we view them as vacant land and look at the legal lot status?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, I think our presumption was that the rural residential is primarily impacted because of the number of dwellings that were unfortunately lost in the rural residential zone, but there are other zones like rural commercial that have criteria that reference lot or parcel, and when the property is vacant or has been vacant for more than a year, that a legal lot verification would be required if we don't have a notice final legal lot verification on file or a plat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So
Does that
it
also,
looks like the answer is
does that also
yes.
apply in farm? Sorry, does that also apply in farm and forest dwellings?
Certain ones, yes. So it's whenever the criteria references if the subject property has been lawfully created, or if it references that the subject property or the dwelling needs to be located on water parcel or a parcel that's been lawfully created. So some examples are in the EFU zone, the replacement dwelling language. When the dwelling no longer exists, the new dwelling is required to be located on a certain area of the lot or parcel. And so that necessitates an analysis that the property where the dwelling is to be located has been lawfully established. Another example is a forest template dwelling that is required to be located on a property that was lawfully created, and that's essentially the same analysis as what we look at in a legal lot verification application, whether a property's been lawfully established or already verified. And there's other applications as well that have those references.
Sorry, so for those forest template dwellings, if they've been in place longer than our code has, and even if it's less than 12 months, are they going to have to go through legal lot verification?
So fortunately for the forest zones, if the dwelling was lawfully established, then I believe they could come in and apply for a forest zone replacement dwelling application, which per the temporary rules that LCDC has approved that we're tracking, has the provision that allows for replacement within 60 months of a lawfully established dwelling in the forest zones. I don't believe that that criteria references lot or parcel.
Excellent. I'm just trying to understand where that 12-month clock applies and making sure that as we lobby for legislation, we're not missing something somewhere. On these properties that are, trying to replace within that 12 months or whatever we get it extended to, do they have to go through a non-conforming use verification? To get replaced if they don't have legal lot status?
I want to take a stab at that one, Amber. It's been a while since I've looked at 16251.
I just want to remind, we have 2 people who have been in the queue for a while for some more questions also. Maybe we lost Amber.
Oh, okay.
I'm so sorry. I'm having technical difficulties here. And I apologize. The question was whether a non-conforming use verification is required if the use has been gone for more than a year.
In addition to a legal lot, or in lieu of a legal lot, I believe.
Sure. So, it depends on the zoning. So if it's a non-conforming use, then yes, the verification could be required. And there is also that unfortunate provision currently in state law that says that the use must be restored and development must be commenced within a year. If the use is listed in the zone, then an application could be made under the current zoning standards. So, for instance, if there's a commercial use in the rural commercial zone and it might require a special use permit, then the applicant could come under a new special use permit application. But if it is a true non-conforming use, then that 1-year provision applies, and we believe that we have standing practice in which we've allowed applicants to come in for building permit if we can verify the use is lawful within a year, but beyond that, there will be a land use application required.
Yeah, I guess I was trying to drill down to whether or not somebody trying to replace a home in that first 12 months would have to verify a non-conforming use if they didn't have a legal lot verification. And that whether that would add time and kick them past the 12 months. I'll cede to somebody else right now, but I was just trying to focus on where we might have land use procedures that are, not only are they somewhat timely to go through, there's usually about a $2,600 review fee with them, and there's 6 to 9 month processes that are appealable and can actually get out 2 years through appeals. So I just wanted to try and focus on some of those things, but obviously the real important thing is to get that extension through the legislature. So thank you, and I'll come back later on the second round.
Okay, we've got Commissioner Sorensen, then Commissioner Burney, and just a reminder that we have an order in front of us that we need to get to as well. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. I'd like to move approval of the order and be recognized.
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Sorensen, second by Commissioner Farr. Any further discussion?
Yeah, thank you so much for recognizing me to make a few comments and make this motion. I think it's really important that the county put the resources into this that has been requested. It's really important that we show the residents of the victims, I should say, of the Holiday Farm fire, that we are assisting them in whatever ways we can. And appreciate staff reminding us that we are not going to be able to waive all of the fees, but there may be other ways of helping people. And I had one specific question I wanted to zero in on, and that has to do with the notion of a sliding scale for fees. It seems to me that if somebody is fairly destitute and they want to put up a tent or at least a tent structure on a temporary basis on their property so they can do work on their property, that the cost to Lane County in terms of approving that temporary request is fairly low. But if someone wants to put in a 5-bedroom house with a swimming pool and lots of other things, and they're going to spend $500,000 to do that, that to me is a separate kind of situation. And I'm wondering if either Ms. Bell or Mr. Miller could talk a little bit and allow me to ask a few more questions regarding the sliding scale concept and whether or not we can recover from those able to pay the cost of processing the applications, and for those people who cannot afford to pay or are asking for something relatively minor, if we could have a sliding scale for those people. So could you comment on that?
Sure, Commissioner Sorensen. In the packet, I kind of lay out several questions that if the board finds an option for fee waivers that we should consider. And obviously one of them is the issue of equity. Is a fee waiver for, a 1,500 square foot manufactured home. Obviously the costs for that plan review are much less than a larger stick-built complex home. Along those same lines, an issue to consider is that the majority of parcels with insurance, and I'll say, there are a lot of folks who don't have insurance, particularly in Blue River. There were a number of folks who, extremely low income. There was some squatting we're aware of. There's a number of folks that just aren't covered by insurance. But those that are covered by insurance, we surveyed a number of insurance firms, and they all agreed that, building permits and land use permits, whatever it would cost to reestablish the dwelling, those permit fees are covered by homeowners insurance policy. So that's another thing to consider, is if the owner is covered, should they get a waiver? The equity thing is a challenge, though. If we begin waiving fees for some folks and not others based strictly on the size of the dwelling, I mean, it's hard to know what the financial situation of folks is, regardless of how big, maybe their previous house was, in the family for generations and they want to replace it the way it was, but they're cash poor, land rich. We've got folks like that in the county. It becomes a challenge. I think the board has authority. I was trying to pull up the lane manual around this. I do recall in the past the board has directed fees to be waived in certain instances. So I think it's something you could do. Again, I think
you're
would be a challenge.
fees. I'm talking about having a proportionate fee so that if someone goes out and says, hey, I want to put up this tent structure, and it costs me $1,000 or $500 or $100, then that's a lot different than rebuilding a $5 million property. I'm not talking about waiving fees. I'm talking about having a proportionate sliding scale fee based upon the stated improvement to the property that the person wants to make. So that's what I'm talking about. Can we do that? And can we, you know, I bought a lot of houses in the course of my 69 years of life. And I bought houses in Eugene. I bought condos in Eugene. I bought condos in Washington, D.C. I bought all kinds of properties. And the fees for remodeling and all that were a minor part of the whole rebuilding process. And so I'm just not understanding why we are not having a way to make it fair to the people who need to get their homes rebuilt, who are going to put in substantial amounts of money to do so. And I'm not understanding why we wouldn't have a sliding scale based upon, you know, not whether they're cash poor, not whether they're land rich, but on the basis of the improvement that they're going to be making to the property. And if that right now is a tent, that's a low dollar amount, and maybe that should be $10. I'm just asking the question: can we put some equity into this process so that someone that is going to build a $5 million property is going to have to pay a much higher fee than someone that's going to try to pitch a tent and do the best they can until they get ready to do the rebuilding?
I apologize, Commissioner Sorensen. I don't think I fully understood the question. The answer is yes, and we do currently do that. So the permit fees that we calculate are based on a number of factors, square footage being the primary one. So right now, a tent on a property, the permit for that, you know, I don't even know what permit fee we would charge for that. An equivalent is like the emergency RV permit, where it's, you know, $400 and some for the citing of the permit on the property, and then there can be associated electrical hookup, et cetera. Whereas that's pretty minor, and we're waiving those fees right now. That's at one end of the spectrum. And then if you build a great big house, you know, with a lot of square footage, those fees are going to be quite a lot higher. So it is equitable right now, in that it's based more on, you know, the size of the project, the amount of work it takes for the plan review, the complexity of the project. So the fees do currently operate on a sliding scale, so to speak.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I have Commissioner Burney and then Commissioner Farr. Thank you.
This discussion has evolved since I had my question, but I would like to state this. It seems to me that it's exceedingly clear that this board, having approved additional officers for this area and for rural areas at our last meeting, and digging into our various reserve accounts, I'm going to support this motion, and I'm looking forward to calling the vote. But I also wanted to point out at this time that I don't want us to lose sight of what Commissioner Bozovich and I discussed a few weeks ago. Mr. Mokraheisky and I presented to the United Way to see if they would be interested in being a fiscal agent, and what that would mean for a fund to assist people with various costs attendant to rebuilding, especially at the front end. So I don't want this group to think that's gone away, and I think that can contribute to the attempts at equity and support that Keir and Amber and others within the framework of rules and regulations are trying to also enable. So there will be more on that, and that needs to be strategically applied in the context of equity, efficiency, and rebuilding. And I also want to say that I'm always disappointed when I learn that professionals like Mr. Wingart and Mr. Ramirez live in Springfield because it forces me to up my game a bit. And I'm attempting to do that, gentlemen, now that I realize you're my bosses. Thank you.
I'll just point out, Commissioner Burney, that I live in Springfield as well.
Who said that?
That was Kier.
Oh, man. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. Before the vote, just very briefly to the motion, I have a recommendation regarding the 3 new positions, and I'm going to forward this recommendation in writing to the planning department through Mr. Mokrahayski and Mr. Rickoff. As this, a creative workaround for the new positions might be to dedicate part of the time of one of the new staffers specifically to tiny homes as a tiny house ombudsman, since it doesn't really quite fit into any of the rebuilding categories, giving it a special attention by one of the staffers. And I'm going to forward that once again in writing to Mr. Mokrahayski and Mr. Rickoff to the planning department. Thank you, Chair, and I'm ready for the vote when everybody else.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody's comments, and a lot of the questions I had have been asked and answered. There's only one left, which is we have a lot of elderly people who live up there who don't have the time or energy to rebuild. And the question has been presented, if they want to sell their property to other family members, do those family members have the right to rebuild on that lot as if it was the original homeowner, because they want that to be carried on and that opportunity to be carried on. So that would be another important question that if we don't have an answer now, we should look into.
Sure, I think I can respond to that, Chair Buck. Development opportunities go with the land. So, you know, if a home was authorized and there are replacement rights on that property, it can be sold with those replacement rights. Doesn't have to be the same owner who exercises those rights.
Thank you. I want to make sure that that was clear for those people that are watching. In addition, just a reminder that there are counties all over Oregon that are dealing with the exact same issues we've been talking about all morning long. We're not necessarily alone in this, which is why we're going to be seeing legislation that I think is going to be bipartisan and all directed at rebuilding for various locations, much of it in outlining areas like unincorporated zones, not always in the city. So, you know, combined efforts with other commissioners and boards is really important. I continue to be on those calls. And I think that there'll be several high priority bills around these things, especially when it comes to 12-month timeline for rebuilding. I'm very supportive of adding the 3 full-time employees. And one of the final comments I've been getting from people is, yes, of course, they'd love to have fee waivers, and we'd love to be able to give them to them. But they're more interested in the speediness of the permit process than anything else. Mm-hmm. And so if we can address the speed of the system, that would really go a very long way. So I'm hoping that your department can review that and see how we can speed up our process. So
thanks for that comment, Chair Buck. I'll just respond and say that that's at the top of mind for us, and it's been, you know, in all my years in land management, there's always a desire to have, you know, permit speed increased, and it's gotten even more important now in the age of COVID where things have dragged out. So that is a focus of our attention. So thanks.
Thank you. If there's not any other comments, Commissioner Farr.
Only this, Chair Buck, and thank you to thank Commissioner Wingard and Councilor Lowry for sticking with us through this. It appears to be the bitter end of today's conversation.
Yes, we got a great group of people. Commissioner Burney.
I'd like to call the question.
Okay, question's been called. We will go to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody, for a really good work session on this. I know that this conversation is not the end of it. We'll all be trudging through a recovery process for a long time, and may need to revisit a work session like this in the next year. Yes, Kieran.
Thank you, Chair Buck. And I did want to just help end the meeting on a positive note. You've all been looking at this photo in front of you. There are two homes here that were on Gate Creek up to Mackenzie. Both of these homes survived the wildfire. We got a really nice note from the landowners, something to the effect of, the next time somebody grumbles about land use requirements, please show the picture of our homes that were saved by defensible space. And so I just want to point that out. I know that the board, is eager to see this community redevelop. We'll be coming back to the board this winter to talk about our fire safety siting standards. We'll be looking at things like defensible space around homes, which does work, and it worked for these folks. Obviously, we want to see redevelopment up to Mackenzie. Our hope is that we can do it in a resilient way. So I thought that was a positive note to end on. So thank you.
Appreciate that. And firefighters did a hell of a job up there. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. And I'm going to try and end on a positive note too. First, I just want to make sure it's clear. I didn't bring this up under the last motion because I didn't think it was pertinent to the actual motion, but our building permit fees are on a sliding scale. If you pull up the fee estimator calculation, it's based on square feet and cost per square foot. So if you're doing a 5,000 square foot home at $200 a square foot because you're putting in granite countertops and heated floors and all that, your fee is a whole lot more than a 2,000 square foot, $150 per square foot home. So, there is a sliding scale, so to speak, based on the value of the construction that you're building. And that's how our permit fees are charged. I just want to make sure that's clear because there was a lot of confusion in the discussion, the last motion about that issue. I finally just want to say, I really appreciate a lot of the work that Keir and his department's done. In the initial part of your discussion, Keir, you talked about all the things you're doing to help out, like your office upriver, the fact that you're allowing surveyors to certify riparian setback, prior riparian setback encroachments. That is just a huge thing for a lot of people. And everything you're doing in those ways, I just want to give you my heartfelt thanks for helping those people out. And I think you guys are doing a great job. I know I ask a lot of very detailed questions and I'm pushing, for ways to work around time limitations and everything else that I do. But you guys are doing some great work in trying to help those people and trying to ease their anxiety around their ability to rebuild. And I just want to say thank you for all that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Burney?
I did not have my hand up.
Okay.
But since called upon, I want to echo Commissioner Bozovich's remarks and be so presumptuous as to say that all of us feel that way. We're all in this together. And on the one hand, this has really hit Commissioner Buck's district the hardest, and I know she's been engaged and in there. On the other hand, whether people know it or not, we're all in there with you and we're doing everything possible. And I would say, Commissioner Bozovich, I, for one, appreciate your digging in because it always informs the best way to move forward. Thank you.
If I may, and I apologize that my internet cut out during your question, Commissioner Bozovich, I did want to confirm that within a year, we wouldn't require a non-conforming use verification application for a replacement of a dwelling in the rural residential zone. The same is the case for other zones in the 16290 we refer to in the 6290 series, like the rural commercial zone or the rural industrial zone, because there's a provision that allows repair, replacement, restoration of a use that's not otherwise allowed in those zones. So that's specifically called out. So our long-standing practice has been to allow replacement of those uses in the rural commercial, rural industrial, rural residential zones within a year without a non-conforming use verification. If there was a true non-conforming use, then a non-conforming use verification would be required in other zones. I just wanted to provide that clear.
Commissioner Bernie.
Amber, I just wanted to tell you, never apologize for technical difficulties. At the end of the meeting yesterday, apparently, I froze when my mouth was wide open, and these poor people were looking at that picture for like a minute, and I couldn't get back on. You've always gotten back on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for a really good conversation. And for those that are watching, especially those from up the McKinsey area that were affected, know that Lane County is all in with you. All of our commissioners are on board to help you rebuild as best as we possibly can. Hang in there, and we'll stick with you as well. With that, we are adjourned for today.